The morning air was still, the kind of silence that usually meant the lake was waiting for him. Every dawn he walked down the worn wooden pier with his fishing rod, boots crunching against the damp earth. But this morning was different. He stopped short. The lake that once shimmered like glass now carried a stench that burned his throat. Dead fish floated belly up, their silver scales catching the early light like broken mirrors. The water, once his sanctuary, was now a graveyard. He crouched by the edge, his hands trembling as he dipped them into the murky water. It felt slick, unnatural, tainted by chemicals that didn't belong. He knew this wasn't nature. Someone had done this. Someone had killed his lake. And then, through the haze of his shock, he noticed something else. A laminated sign nailed crudely to a post. Fishing prohibited, contaminated water. At the bottom, in bold letters, was the seal of the Homeowners Association. The realization hit like a knife. The HOA had poisoned the lake. Not by accident, not by neglect, but on purpose. They wanted to stop him from fishing. But what they didn't know was that by destroying his lake, they had unknowingly set fire to their own lifeline. Because the water running under this soil didn't just feed his pier. It flowed into every faucet, every shower, and every glass in the community. His voice was low, steady, almost a whisper carried by the wind. They thought they could kill the lake to kill me, but they didn't realize they were killing themselves. And as the sun rose over the poisoned water, one question echoed louder than the morning silence. What would you do if your own community tried to destroy the one place you loved most, only to find out you held the power to destroy them back? Cliffhanger ending. The camera lingers on the floating fish, the poisoned water, and the faint smile forming on his face. Justice was coming. Long before the poison, long before the HOA's arrogance, the lake was more than water. It was memory. It was family. For him, the man who lived on its edge, the lake had been there since childhood. His grandfather taught him how to cast a line from the same wooden pier. His father taught him patience, the art of waiting for the quiet tug beneath the surface. And when life grew heavy, when his marriage crumbled, when loneliness settled into the walls of his house, the lake became his sanctuary. Every evening after work, he sat by the rippling water, fishing rod in hand, not just for the catch but for the silence. Neighbors often saw him there, a solitary figure against the glow of sunset, and some admired his devotion. But others whispered, and at the head of those whispers was the one woman who thrived on control. The HOA president, known behind closed doors as Karen in a suit. She claimed fishing lowered property values. She sneered that his pier was unsightly. Her speeches at board meetings painted him as a problem, not a neighbor. She wanted the lake spotless, artificial, like a photograph in a magazine. No fishermen, no ripples, no life. Just her vision of perfection. And so the tension grew. Letters slipped into his mailbox, notices taped to his door. Violations, fines, empty threats. At first he ignored them. He thought reason would win. But reason has no place in the heart of someone who sees control as power. One evening, as the moonlight spread across the water, he noticed something strange near the shore. Dark silhouettes of barrels half buried in reeds, glistening under the silver glow. They hadn't been there the night before. He crouched, touching the cold metal, the chemical smell stinging his nose. His gut twisted. He knew what this meant. The HOA wasn't just trying to stop him. They were willing to kill the lake to break him, and that's when the story shifted from defense to retaliation. Before we move forward, if you're watching this and you feel the weight of injustice as strongly as he did, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like this video, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps us bring you more stories of justice, revenge, and survival. Because what happened next would shake the entire neighborhood. Cliffhanger ending. The camera lingers on the barrels, the shimmering toxic leak creeping into the water. And in the distance, the faint glow of the HOA clubhouse windows, the enemy watching from the dark. The attack didn't come with noise. It came with silence, the kind of silence that made you realize something living had just died. By the time the sun rose over the lake again, the evidence was everywhere. Fish floated in clusters, their bodies bobbing against the shore like discarded trash. Birds that once circled above were gone, the reeds stood eerily still, and the air reeked of chemical death. The HOA wasted no time. By mid-morning, bright orange notices were stapled to every tree and fence post around the lake. Fishing prohibited. Water contaminated. Safety hazard. On paper, it looked like concern for public health, but in truth, it was the final nail in their plot. They had poisoned the lake and with a stroke of a pen erased his right to use it. He stood there reading the notice, his hands clenched, fury and grief burning together inside him. This lake had been his escape, his legacy, his one tether to peace. Now it was being paraded as a health risk, a scarlet letter nailed by the very people who destroyed it. Neighbors muttered nervously as they passed. Some looked at him with pity. Others avoided his eyes, fearful of crossing the HOA. And standing tallest among them all, with her smug smile and clipped tone, was Karen in a suit. To her, this was victory. She had silenced him, or so she thought, but then came the mistake. In the weeks that followed, he dug deeper. He spent hours in county offices, poring over property records and environmental codes. And what he found made his blood run cold. Buried in official paperwork, hidden under legal jargon, were permits that proved the HOA had known exactly what was in those barrels. They hadn't just broken the law, they had documented their own crime. The realization was staggering. They had killed the lake to stop one man from fishing, but in doing so, they had left a trail of evidence sharp enough to cut their empire in half. And this was no longer just about fishing. This was about justice, about revenge. Before I continue, if you believe no one should ever have the right to destroy someone's peace like this, make sure to subscribe to our channel, hit that like button, and share this video with your friends. And tell us in the comments, what would you do if your community poisoned your home? Because for him, the fight had just begun. Cliffhanger ending. The camera zooms in on the stamped HOA documents. The words approved disposal highlighted under their seal, and his hand folding the paper with a quiet, dangerous calm. Justice was no longer a dream. It was inevitable. He didn't lash out right away. That's what they expected. An angry outburst, a desperate plea, a broken man storming into the HOA office demanding answers. But he stayed silent. He let them believe they had won. All the while he planned. Night after night he pored over infrastructure maps, old county records and water management charts. And then the truth revealed itself like a secret weapon waiting in the dark. The HOA's prized community, their manicured lawns, their pristine fountains, their endless rows of sprinkler-fed gardens, all of it depended on one thing. The lake. The very lake they had poisoned. Cinematic pause. In trying to kill my peace, they had poisoned their own lifeline. The realization filled him with a cold, steady fire. He didn't need to fight them with fists or lawyers. He would fight them with silence, with patience. With control, he began quietly, checking the old valves buried beneath the maintenance sheds, inspecting the pipelines that branched like veins beneath the soil. He learned every twist and every lock in the system until he knew it better than the HOA itself. And then, one evening as the neighborhood slept, he turned the first valve. The water slowed. The sprinklers sputtered. By morning, the lawns that had once been emerald green began to fade into thirsty patches of brown. At first, the residents thought it was routine maintenance. Karen in a suit issued a statement with her usual smugness, promising repairs. But days stretched into weeks, and the faucets grew weaker. Showers turned to drizzles, and whispers of panic spread through the streets. All the while, he sat calmly at his pier, rod in hand, pretending to fish in a poisoned lake. His silence spoke louder than their rules, because the deeper the HOA dug into their excuses, the closer they came to realizing the terrifying truth. Their empire was crumbling, and the man they tried to silence now held their future in his hands. Cliffhanger ending. The camera lingers on Karen in a suit's furious face as she slams her fist during a board meeting, shouting that someone must be sabotaging their water, while across the lake, his shadow stands at the valve, hand resting calmly on the wheel. It began with whispers, faucets sputtering in the morning, showers cutting off midstream, sprinklers coughing dry air over brittle grass. At first, residents brushed it aside, thinking it was a temporary outage, a minor fix the HOA would handle. But within days, panic spread like fire through the community. Lawns that had once been symbols of wealth and perfection shriveled to patches of yellow. Neighbors dragged hoses across their driveways, praying for a trickle, only to find nothing but air. Karen in a suit stood tall at the first emergency meeting, her voice sharp, her confidence unshaken. "It's just maintenance," she declared, lips curled in a smile that no longer fooled anyone. But as the days passed, bottled water flew off store shelves. Parents worried about their children. Elders whispered about health, and every complaint funneled back to her. The irony was brutal. For years she had boasted about the HOA's image. Perfect homes, perfect lawns, perfect lives. Now the very perfection she demanded crumbled into dust before everyone's eyes. Residents cursed under their breath, their once loyal admiration turning to suspicion and rage. And all the while, across the poisoned lake, the man sat calmly at his pier. His fishing rod rested on his knee, untouched, while he watched the neighborhood unravel like a stage play he had written. Every dry faucet, every wilting flower, every desperate phone call, all of it was his silent revenge. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the houses, a figure slipped quietly through the shadows toward his yard. It wasn't Karen. It was another board member, sweat on his brow, desperation in his eyes. He stopped at the edge of the pier, voice low, almost trembling. "They know," the man said. "They know this isn't maintenance. They know someone is shutting it down." He swallowed hard, glancing nervously back at the houses. "But they don't know it's you." "Not yet." The man looked up, his gaze steady, unreadable. The silence between them stretched heavy across the dying lake. Cliffhanger ending. The board member leaned in closer, his whisper almost broken with fear. "I came here because I think they're going to come after you." The knock came long after midnight, sharp, hurried, desperate. He opened the door to find two HOA board members standing in the shadows, their faces pale, their pride stripped away. They weren't here as officials anymore. They were here as beggars. Inside his kitchen, they sat at the table, hands clenched, voices trembling. For weeks, the neighborhood had suffered. Faucets coughed air, lawns turned brown, tempers snapped like brittle branches. Families were leaving, property values were collapsing. And with every passing day, the blame spread like wildfire, all of it landing on the HOA. Finally, one of them broke. "We need you to fix it," he pleaded. "Turn it back on. You have no idea what's happening out there." But the man did know. He knew exactly. He had watched them from across the poisoned lake, their empire of control unraveling thread by thread. And now they were sitting in his house, asking for the lifeline they had tried to steal from him. He leaned back in his chair, his face calm, his voice low. "You poisoned my lake. You called it an eyesore. You posted your smug little signs. And now you want me to give you back your water?" The room went silent, the weight of his words pressing on them like iron. One of the board members tried to stammer out an excuse, blaming Karen, blaming miscommunication, but he raised his hand, silencing them. "My demands are simple," he said coldly. "A public apology, restitution for the damage you've done, and every member of your leadership gone, resigned, starting with her." The board members exchanged terrified glances. One nodded slowly, defeated, but the other clenched his jaw, his pride still alive. "You don't understand," he hissed. "Karen won't allow it. She'll crush you in court before she ever apologizes." The man's eyes narrowed, his voice dropping to a whisper that cut through the silence. "Then she's already lost." Cliffhanger ending. Outside the window, headlights swept across the street. Karen's car. She had come herself, and she wasn't here to beg. Word spread faster than fire. The first whispers of poisoned waters became shouts, and shouts became headlines. Local news vans pulled up to the neighborhood, cameras rolling as reporters whispered into microphones, capturing footage of dead fish, withered lawns, and anxious neighbors clutching empty bottles of water. The HOA tried to spin the story at first. "Maintenance issue," Karen in a suit repeated in every interview, her voice clipped and rehearsed. But the footage told a different story. Barrels half buried along the shore, chemical residue floating in the lake, and water tests proving deliberate contamination. Each broadcast was a hammer pounding against the fragile armor of the HOA's reputation. Neighbors, once silent or fearful, found their voices. Community meetings erupted into chaos. People demanded accountability, airing years of grievances long suppressed. Karen in a suit's smug confidence cracked under the weight of public scrutiny. Social media lit up with photos, videos, and angry hashtags. Memes mocking the HOA's hubris spread faster than wildfire. The man watched silently from the pier, fishing rod forgotten beside him. He didn't need to speak. The world already knew what had happened. Every faucet that sputtered, every lawn that withered, every terrified call to the HOA was proof enough. Even some of the board members who had supported Karen could no longer hide. Public pressure forced confessions, official statements, and ultimately legal action. The community's fury, once fragmented and quiet, now moved as one unstoppable wave, crashing against the walls of the HOA clubhouse. Cliffhanger ending. Karen in a suit stood on the steps of the clubhouse, reporters flashing cameras in her face, her carefully constructed image crumbling, knowing that the empire she had built on control and fear was now being dismantled before her very eyes. The next morning, the world watched as inspectors in hazmat suits marched through the HOA clubhouse. Every file, every email, every barrel buried near the lake became evidence against her. Cameras captured her face, once smug and untouchable, now pale and taut with panic. Legal notices piled up on her desk. Environmental agencies cited violations that carried enormous fines. Neighbors who had once cowered now confronted her in public meetings, their voices sharp with betrayal. The very power she had wielded so cruelly turned against her, mocking every decree she had ever made. Her board members abandoned her one by one. Resignations flooded in. Statements of apology were signed under duress. Karen in a suit tried to fight, tried to intimidate, but every threat, every claim, only amplified the spotlight on her crimes. The press had a field day. Headlines screamed, HOA president poisoned community lake and greed and hubris destroy neighborhood leader. She pleaded in interviews, but no one believed her anymore. Her empire, built on control and fear, had been exposed as fragile, corrupt, and criminal. Memes and social media posts ridiculed her daily, her carefully curated image shredded in seconds. Even at night she could not escape. The neighborhood whispered, the press followed, and her reputation lay in ruins. Every morning she faced the lake she had tried to destroy, a silent witness to her downfall, while the man who had once suffered in silence watched, calm and victorious. Cliffhanger ending. One evening, she stormed toward his pier, fury in her eyes, a last desperate attempt to reclaim control. But as she approached, the water remained calm, reflecting only her own ruined reflection. She realized too late. The battle was over and she had lost. The first rays of dawn reflected off the water, clear and calm like a mirror finally healed. The poisoned lake, once a graveyard of dead fish and chemical sludge, had begun its slow recovery. Environmental crews worked tirelessly, flushing out toxins, aerating the water, and reintroducing fish. Birds returned, dipping and gliding over the surface as if sensing the lake's renewed life. He stood at the pier, rod in hand, feeling the familiar tug beneath the surface. The quiet that had once been his alone now felt shared, a calm reassurance that justice had been served. The neighbors who had once scowled or whispered now nodded in respect, some even quietly joining him by the water's edge, casting lines into the slowly healing lake. Karen in a suit was gone from power, her threats silenced by law, community outrage, and the undeniable evidence of her corruption. Her board members had resigned, leaving the HOA fractured and humbled. The very community she had tried to control now thrived with transparency and fairness, guided by a renewed sense of accountability. And yet, the man remained cautious. His victory was sweet but hard-earned. Every ripple across the lake reminded him of what had been lost and what could be destroyed in a moment of greed. He fished not just for leisure, but as a quiet testament that patience, intelligence, and calm resolve could triumph over arrogance and cruelty. Cinematic close. The camera pulls back, showing the restored lake, the pier, and the man standing tall, a figure of quiet triumph against the backdrop of a recovering world. The sunlight glints off the water, illuminating a victory that had been hard-fought but ultimately deserved. Cliffhanger hint. Though peace had returned, the lake's whispers suggested vigilance, because when people like Karen in a suit exist, no victory is ever completely final. Weeks passed and life around the lake began to settle. Children laughed along the shore, neighbors chatted amicably, and the water reflected a calm golden sunset. The man finally felt the weight lift from his shoulders. He had won, the lake had survived, and justice had been served. But just as he cast his line into the clear water, a letter slid under his door. No return address, no name, just a single typed sentence. "We're not done yet." A chill ran down his spine. Even with Karen in a suit gone and the HOA dismantled, the warning reminded him that greed and malice could return in new forms. The lake had survived, but the world outside never stopped testing patience, resilience and cunning. He stared out at the water, gripping his rod tighter, knowing one truth: victories are never permanent, and vigilance is always required. And yet the lake remained, a testament to endurance, patience, and justice. Final moral question for the audience: if someone threatened everything you loved, and you had the power to turn the tables, would you seek revenge or walk away and let justice take its course? The water rippled in answer, but the choice, as always, belonged to him and to anyone who ever dared challenge the powerful. Closing cinematic note. The sun dips below the horizon, the lake glowing softly, the man's silhouette framed against it, a symbol of quiet triumph and the lingering uncertainty of what comes next.